Ethan Cross tightened his grip on the worn-out plasma pistol as he stepped through the ruins of an abandoned space colony. The air smelled of rust and damp metal, the remnants of a civilization long forgotten. His boots crunched against shattered glass and broken tech, relics of a war that had left planets like this to rot in the void. He was here to scavenge, nothing more, nothing less. Just another nameless world in the lawless territories of the Fringe, where survival was measured in firepower and gut instinct. Yet something felt wrong. The silence was too thick, the air too still. Then he heard it. A faint rustling, barely perceptible over the howling wind. He turned the corner, weapon raised, ready to fire. But he didn't pull the trigger. Huddled between two crumbling walls, wrapped in what looked like tattered rags, was a girl. Not just any girl, an alien. Her limbs were painfully thin, her skin bruised and marred by dirt and dried blood. Her silver eyes, once luminous, were now dulled by exhaustion. She looked at him. Then at the half-eaten protein bar clutched in her trembling fingers. Ethan's stomach twisted. She was starving. Character introduction, the struggle between caution and compassion. He should leave. This was not his fight. He had spent years keeping his head down, avoiding trouble, and staying out of other people's problems. The galaxy was a brutal place, and those who got involved often wound up dead. Yet he didn't move. The girl shrank against the wall, pressing herself into the shadows like a frightened animal. Her gaze flickered between his face and his gun. "Who are you running from?" he asked, his voice low but firm. No answer. He took a slow step forward. She flinched. Ethan cursed under his breath. "She thinks I'm going to hurt her." He crouched, keeping his movements deliberate. "I'm not here to harm you." His eyes flicked to the protein bar, the desperation in her grip unmistakable. "But I don't think you'll last another day out here." The girl's breath hitched, her fingers tightening around the food like it was the only thing tethering her to life. Then, she did something unexpected. She spoke. Not in Galactic Common, not in any language he recognized. It was a series of soft, melodic syllables, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan frowned. He had encountered plenty of alien species before, but this one? She was different. "Can you understand me?" he tried again. A long silence stretched between them. Then, her lips parted. "Yes." Her voice was hoarse, cracked from thirst. Ethan exhaled, lowering his weapon slightly. Progress. Building suspense, the weight of an unspoken past. "Who are you?" he asked, though he already suspected she wouldn't answer. The girl hesitated. Then, slowly, she whispered, "Liara." Ethan ran the name through his mind. It didn't match any common alien registries he knew of. "Liara." He tested the name on his tongue. "All right. Now tell me, who's after you?" She stiffened at the question, her body language shifting from fear to pure terror. Ethan didn't miss it. Before she could respond, a distant metallic clatter echoed through the ruins. His instincts screamed a warning. They were not alone. Liara went rigid, her breath quickening. Ethan knew that kind of fear. It wasn't just the fear of being caught. It was the fear of what happened after. Whoever she was running from, they were close. And they weren't here for negotiation. Climactic moment, the choice that changes everything. Ethan's mind raced. He had two options. 1. Walk away. Leave her to her fate. It wasn't his fight. He wasn't a hero, never had been. 2. Interfere. Get involved in something that could very well get him killed. A shadow moved in the distance, accompanied by the sharp, unmistakable whir of a tracking drone. Ethan made his decision. He grabbed Liara's wrist. Her eyes widened. "Move!" he ordered, voice edged with steel. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then she obeyed. Together, they bolted into the ruins as the night filled with the hum of approaching hunters. Ethan had no idea what the hell he was getting himself into. But one thing was certain. There was no turning back now. Ethan Cross didn't stop running. The sharp, synthetic hum of a tracking drone sliced through the night air, growing louder with each passing second. Behind him, Liara stumbled, her breathing ragged and uneven. He yanked her forward, barely dodging a crumbling column of rusted steel as they tore through the ruins. He should have left her. That thought gnawed at him, whispering of logic, of self-preservation. But as he glanced at her, frail, terrified, yet gripping his hand like it was the last thing keeping her tethered to life, he knew he was already too deep. The first shot came like lightning, a streak of blue plasma carving a molten scar into the stone inches from his head. They had found them. Character introduction. Trust is a fragile thing. Liara gasped, nearly collapsing. Ethan gritted his teeth and half lifted her, her weight too light, too fragile for comfort. Whatever had happened to her before he found her, it had broken her down to the edge of survival. Not that it mattered now. He pushed forward, weaving through the skeletal remains of a civilization long lost to war. The cold night wind bit at his face, thick with the scent of rust and decay. Then, a ship. Not his, but it didn't matter. Docked between two collapsed buildings, the battered freighter was their best shot at escaping whoever the hell was after her. "Move!" Ethan growled, practically dragging her toward it. She was slowing. Too slow. Then she stopped. I can't," she gasped, her voice raw, her legs trembling beneath her. Ethan turned, furious. "What do you mean you?" Then he saw it. The fear wasn't from exhaustion alone. She was terrified. Not of the men chasing them. Of the ship. Of leaving the ruins behind. Ethan didn't have time for this. "You want to die here?" he snapped. "Because that's what's gonna happen if you don't move." Liara's lips parted like she wanted to speak, but a second plasma shot erased the space where she'd just been standing. She flinched. That was enough. Ethan hoisted her up and ran. Tension builds, a leap of faith or a death sentence. The ship's cargo hatch was unlocked, a stroke of luck he'd have no time to question. Ethan shoved Liara inside just as another shot struck the metal doorframe, sending a spray of molten sparks raining over them. Inside, the cargo hold smelled of oil and coolant, dimly lit by flickering emergency lights. Ethan slammed the hatch shut, locking them in darkness. Liara shook violently. Her breath came in rapid, shallow bursts, her skin too pale. "Breathe," Ethan ordered, gripping her shoulders. "You're safe for now." A bitter laugh tore from his throat. "Safe? Right." Liara's wide silver eyes met his. Something in her fractured expression made him pause. She wasn't just scared. She was broken. He knew that look. Had worn it himself, once. Before he could speak, a deep voice echoed from the ship's intercom. "Who the hell just stole my freighter?" Twist, the wrong kind of rescue. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. "Shit." Liara's fingers curled into his jacket. "You said we were safe." "I lied," he muttered. The voice on the intercom sighed. "You've got about 30 seconds to explain before I vent the cargo hold." Ethan clenched his jaw. He had two options. One, fight. Problem was, he didn't know how many people were on board. Two, talk his way out. He wasn't great at that. Still, he pressed the intercom button. "Listen, I know this looks bad, but we're not here to steal your ship." A pause. Then, "You're in my ship without my permission." "How is that not stealing?" Ethan exhaled sharply. "Because I plan to pay you." Another pause. Then a snort. "Pay me? With what?" Ethan's lips curled into a smirk. "Your life, if you open the damn door before those mercs outside turn you into slag." Silence. Then, the door hissed open. Ethan turned to Liara. "Stay close." She didn't let go of his jacket. Escalating stakes, a man with his own secrets. The pilot was a tall, scarred man with cybernetic implants lining his arms, his expression unreadable. His crew, a mix of humans and aliens, stood behind him, weapons drawn. Ethan raised his hands. "Easy. Just need a ride." The pilot's gaze flicked to Liara. His frown deepened. "She's the reason you're running." Ethan didn't blink. Yeah. The pilot exhaled, rubbing his jaw. Then, without warning, he turned and shot the closest crew member in the leg. The man crumpled with a scream. Ethan tensed. What the? The pilot turned back to Ethan and Liara. That one was going to sell you out the second we left orbit. His voice was calm. Too calm. Ethan exchanged a wary glance with Liara. The pilot holstered his gun. You've got a deal. But understand this, whatever the hell she is. He jabbed a finger at Liara. She better be worth the war you just started. Ethan clenched his fists. He didn't have an answer for that. Because, deep down, he knew the truth. This wasn't just about saving Liara anymore. This was bigger. And whatever came next? There was no way out. The hum of the freighter's engines vibrated through the floor, a rhythmic thrum that underscored the weight of Ethan's decision. They were flying blind now, off the charts, past the reach of galactic law, and into a darker world where survival was bought with secrets, blood, or betrayal. Ethan leaned against the cold metal wall of the cockpit, watching the pilot, Joran Kess, as he called himself, punch coordinates into the NAV system with a little too much ease. Too practiced. Too controlled. Ethan didn't trust him. But at the moment, he didn't have a choice. Liara sat across from him, curled into herself, her silver eyes fixed on the flickering lights of the control panel. Her fingers trembled slightly, and for the first time since they had met, Ethan realized something. She wasn't just afraid. She was waiting. Waiting for him to abandon her. Waiting for the inevitable betrayal. And that realization sank into his chest like a cold blade. Character introduction: the fractures beneath the surface. You gonna tell me what the hell she is yet? Joran's voice broke the silence, deep and edged with a curiosity that wasn't casual. Ethan didn't look away from Liara. She's a survivor. Joran scoffed. Yeah? Survivors don't have bounty prices high enough to make a fleet captain consider mutiny. Ethan clenched his jaw. He already knew someone, somewhere, wanted her at any cost. Liara stiffened, shifting slightly against the seat, but she didn't speak. Ethan's fingers twitched against his thigh. If she wasn't going to talk, he needed to. If he wanted to keep her safe, he had to control the narrative. He turned his gaze back to Joran. Let's get something straight. You're not gonna turn us in. Joran leaned back, a slow grin spreading across his scarred face. No. No. Funny. You're acting like you have leverage. Ethan tilted his head. I do. Joran arched a brow, waiting. Ethan reached into his jacket and tossed a small data chip onto the console. Encrypted files from the Syndicate database. Enough blackmail material to bring hell down on anyone who crosses me. Joran's grin faltered. Ethan let the silence stretch. It was a bluff, but it didn't matter. Joran was smart enough to believe it. The pilot exhaled through his nose and shook his head. Shit. You really know how to make things complicated, don't you? Ethan didn't answer. Joran tapped the console. Fine. No selling you out. But that means we need to talk business. You need somewhere to hide, and I need a damn reason to keep you here. Liara shifted, her voice finally cutting through the tension. Why help us at all? Joran's sharp eyes flicked to her, then back to Ethan. Because I don't like the Syndicate. And because I'm curious. A girl like you, with the entire damn underworld after her? I want to know why. Ethan's muscles tensed. Liara didn't answer. Tension builds, the ghosts that chase her. The ship entered hyperspace, stars stretching into streaks of blue and white beyond the viewing panels. For the first time since this chaos started, they had a moment to breathe. Liara exhaled, pressing her hands against her temples. Ethan watched her carefully. She was still too pale. Too weak. She needed rest. She needed food. But more than anything, she needed to talk. And Ethan wasn't sure he was ready for what she had to say. He sat beside her, the small space between them charged with something unspoken. You okay? His voice was quieter now, less sharp. She nodded, but her fingers gripped her arms too tightly. You're lying. A soft breath. I don't know how to be okay. Ethan's throat tightened. Joran left them alone, stepping out of the cockpit, giving them space that Ethan wasn't sure he wanted. The hum of the ship seemed louder now, filling the silence between them. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Liara! Who are you running from? She didn't answer at first. Then, finally, my own kind. Ethan stiffened. He had expected many things: mercenaries, warlords, the Syndicate's worst, but not this. Liara's silver eyes met his, shimmering under the dim glow of the cockpit lights. I was never supposed to exist. Ethan's breath slowed. What do you mean? She hesitated, then whispered. My people, we were engineered. Created, not born. We were designed to be perfect. His pulse quickened. And perfection, she said, voice laced with something broken, doesn't allow failure. A chill ran through him. Something went wrong, she continued. Something in my DNA. They called me defective. And when they couldn't fix me, they decided to erase me. Ethan's hands curled into fists. She had been hunted by her own species. He exhaled slowly, forcing the rage down. And the Syndicate? She swallowed. They trade in genetic anomalies. I'm valuable. His stomach twisted. She wasn't just hunted. She was a commodity. Climactic moment, the real enemy reveals itself. Before Ethan could respond, the ship's alarms blared. Joran stormed back in, eyes dark. You have a damn tracker on you. Liara's blood drained from her face. No. That's not possible. Joran slammed a device onto the console, a small, blinking piece of tech. Possible or not, this thing just broadcasted our location across half the damn galaxy. Ethan stood. Where is it? Joran's gaze flicked to Liara. In her. Liara sucked in a sharp breath, her hands trembling. Ethan's pulse pounded. How do we get it out? Joran's lips thinned. We don't. Not easily. Liara shook her head violently. I didn't know. Ethan caught her hands, forcing her to focus on him. We'll deal with it. The ship's sensors screamed. Joran's voice was grim. We've got incoming. Ethan's grip tightened. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The ship lurched violently, throwing Ethan against the control panel. Alarms shrieked through the cockpit, red warning lights pulsing like a heartbeat in distress. The telltale hum of an enemy ship locking weapons sent a cold shiver down his spine. Joran cursed, gripping the controls with white-knuckled intensity. They're already firing! You really pissed someone off, Cross. Ethan barely heard him over the deafening boom as a blast struck the freighter's shields, sending vibrations rattling through the ship's frame. Liara stumbled forward, bracing herself against the wall, eyes wide with terror. We can't outrun them, Joran barked. Engines aren't fast enough for a clean getaway. Ethan's mind raced. Think. They were still deep in uncharted space, too far from any trade routes to call for backup. The ship's weaponry was laughable compared to what was chasing them down, and he had no idea how many were out there. But he did know one thing. If they didn't act now, they were dead. Character introduction, the breaking point. Ethan turned to Liara, forcing her to focus. The tracker, they're following your signal. We have to get it out. Her breath hitched, panic creeping into her expression. But I don't know where it is. Joran threw a switch, rerouting power to the shields. Then we rip her apart until we find it, because we're fresh out of options. Liara flinched, stepping back. Ethan's anger flared. We're not doing that. His voice was low, dangerous. Joran let out a sharp laugh. Then what, Cross? Hold hands and hope they get bored? Ethan ignored him, turning back to Liara. Think, Liara. You said your people implanted you with something. Where would they hide it? She closed her eyes, trembling. I don't. Then, suddenly, she gasped. She pressed a hand to her ribcage, fingers grazing just below her left side. There, she whispered, voice unsteady. I think it's inside me. Ethan's stomach twisted. If it was inside her, that meant. Joran swore. Then unless one of you has a damn scalpel, we're still screwed. A second blast rocked the ship, throwing them sideways. Sparks rained from the control panels. Ethan clenched his fists. No time. He grabbed a blade from Joran's utility belt and turned back to Liara. She froze. Ethan. We have to do this now. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled. I'll be quick, but I need you to trust me. Her silver eyes searched his, looking for something, doubt, hesitation, fear. But she found none. Then, slowly, she nodded. Tension builds, blood and trust. Ethan worked fast. Joran handed him a sterilized cloth, grumbling something about how this was a horrible idea, but Ethan didn't care. Liara's breath came in short gasps as he made the incision, her skin too fragile, too cold. It wasn't deep, but it was enough. Then, he felt it. A hard, unnatural lump beneath her skin. His fingers brushed against something metallic, smooth, embedded. Liara whimpered. Ethan clenched his jaw. Steady. With a sharp tug, he ripped it free. Liara gasped, her body convulsing for a split second before slumping back. The tracker, ***, a tiny black sphere no larger than a coin, ***, rolled across the floor. Ethan's stomach dropped. It was still blinking. Joran cursed loudly. It's still broadcasting! Ethan grabbed his pistol and shot it. The device exploded into a mess of circuitry and sparks. For a brief, fleeting moment, there was silence. Then, Joran's radar lit up with a dozen enemy signals. Climactic moment, the sky burns. They know we're here. Joran growled, fingers flying over the controls. We need a way out, now! Ethan gritted his teeth. His hands were still covered in Liara's blood, but he didn't have time to care. Liara's eyelids fluttered. Ethan! I've got you! He whispered, pressing a hand to her wound. Just hold on. Joran punched the thrusters, the ship lurching forward just as the first enemy fighters came into range. The viewing panel filled with fire. The enemy ships, sleek, black syndicate hunters, swooped in like vultures, plasma cannons charging. Joran spat. They're gonna tear us apart. Ethan's mind raced. No. There was a way. His eyes flicked to the asteroid belt ahead, jagged, massive chunks of ice and rock, spinning wildly through the void. A death trap. Unless. Fly straight into the belt, Ethan ordered. Joran whirled on him. Are you insane? They won't follow us. They won't have to if we smash into a damn rock. Ethan didn't blink. You said you wanted a reason to keep us here, Joran. This is it. Joran's nostrils flared. Then, with a sharp curse, he yanked the controls. The ship dived straight into the asteroid field. Twist, the war begins. The first enemy ship followed, and was immediately crushed by a spiraling chunk of ice. Ethan exhaled sharply. Two more ships tried to maneuver through, but Joran's piloting was ruthless. He skimmed through the gaps, using the debris as a shield, forcing the enemy to break formation. One by one, they fell away, too hesitant to risk the chase. After what felt like an eternity, the sensors finally went dark. No more enemies. Silence. Ethan exhaled, his chest heaving. He turned to Liara. Her skin was still pale, her breathing shallow, but she was alive. He pushed her damp hair from her face, his voice softer than he meant it to be. You okay? She nodded weakly. You saved me. Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Something dangerous. Joran blew out a breath. Well, that was a shitstorm. Ethan didn't answer. Because deep down, he knew. This wasn't over. The syndicate wouldn't stop. And now? Neither would he. Because Liara wasn't just a fugitive anymore. She was his responsibility. And for the first time in years, Ethan was ready to fight.